शलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपः कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरोः श्रीयुतापदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगणा रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवम् साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सहगणललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च च नमः ॐ विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिविकासस्वामिन् इति नामिने नमः ॐ विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिन् इति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देश तारिणे हरिजन गण बाधी ज्ञान कर्मांधहारी प्रकटित पर भक्ति सिद्धांत कांति विनय निकर लक्ष्मीर निम्न मेधैर गम्यो भुवि जयति विकासो भक्ति पूर्वो यतीन्द्रः। हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधो दीनबंधो जगतपते गोपेश गोपिका कांत राधा कांत नमोस्तुते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. So, reading from Speaking Strongly in Srila Prabhupada's Service, Chapter 11, Fanaticism and Fundamentalism. Even among devotees, those who preach uncompromisingly are among the even among devotees, those who preach uncompromisingly are often labeled extremists, fanatics, or fundamentalists, which is itself an extreme indictment. Why should one be a fanatic? If one has got brain, one has got logic. So this is a quotation from Prabhupada. Why should one be a fanatic? If one has got brain, one has got logic. Why should he be a fanatic? Fanatic means dull-headed rascal. End quote. Srila Prabhupada identified fanaticism as a manifestation of religion without philosophy. Religion without philosophy is sentiment or sometimes fanaticism. A fanatic may be defined as a dogmatic numbskull who is convinced about something and although he cannot reasonably explain why, expects others to accept his chosen doctrine with the same unquestioning zeal as himself. Although he speaks with seemingly certainty, he actually does not understand what he is talking about. Thus, it is a great injustice and a disservice to the preaching mission of Krishna consciousness to inappropriately invoke the fanatic pejorative upon the devotees, upon devotees for their staunch commitment to truths of Shastra that they have deeply studied and imbibed. If that which is dubbed as fanaticism is actually firm faith in Guru and Krishna, manifest as no compromise with karma, jnana, yoga, atheism, or sense gratification, and has an unreserved resolve to serve the mission of the acharyas in the manner that they have taught, then such an uncompromising attitude is not only desirable but is required. Srila Prabhupada himself was sometimes so extreme, for instance, by arguing on stage before thousands that any other member of ISKCON today would be liable to be labeled immature, inexpert, or fanatical for behaving similarly. But a preacher who faithfully and thoughtfully follows Srila Prabhupada's example does not deserve to be labeled a fanatic, although he may be although he may be imitated by fanatics and denigrated by sentimentalists. Indeed, another form of fanaticism is to equate a mature devotee's intelligent commitment and candid preaching, born of genuine spiritual strength and realization, with the bluster of a neophyte. Similarly, it is dismissive chauvinism, an ignorant, biased, and haughty that is like fanatical position to, without considering the arguments being presented, deem as a fanatic anyone who speaks frankly or who has a strong outlook or conviction. Devotees who would vilify their forthright compatriots should consider the analysis of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Quote, those who are unwilling to show any duplicity, who desire to be frank and straightforward, or in other words, to exercise unambiguously the function of the soul, such really sincere individuals are called sectarian and orthodox by those who practice duplicity. End quote. Firm adherence to Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra being the necessary foundation for rapid advancement in Krishna consciousness should not be equated with the fundamentalism epitomized by linear thinking, intolerance, and myopic triumphalism. A well situated devotee might resemble a religious fundamentalist inasmuch as both have deep faith and resolution, but religious systems without scientific knowledge of the nature of God and the jiva, and which therefore lack satisfactory answers to basic questions such as the cause of suffering, cannot but demand blind and unquestioning faith, and hence naturally tend toward fundamentalism. Only devotees who are uneducated or who are uneducated in or unmindful of the tremendous philosophical depth of Krishna consciousness would fault a colleague as being fanatical because of his unwavering adherence to the perspective of reality that Krishna consciousness offers. Admittedly, the public cannot be expected to immediately differentiate between a knowledgeable, dedicated, enthusiastic preacher of Krishna consciousness and an unmindful zealot, and thus devotees should take care not to become misidentified with those blinkered fanatics who believe or burn whose belief or born proselytization is rightly seen as dogmatic, obnoxious, insulting, puerile, and insubstantial. But rather than hiding behind the limp role of an all inclusive, moderate religionist, Vaishnavas should aim to educate the public regarding the depth, universality, universality and scientific approach of Krishna consciousness in contrast to myopic religious systems. It is true that forwardness in preaching may be construed as or actually motivated by egoism, envy, or unnecessary anger toward others. And certainly a preacher should be devoid of fanatical behavior, such as vehemently presenting teachings which he has little knowledge or realization of, being more interested to defeat and denounce than to convince and uplift others, or adopting unfair means of argument, for instance, deliberately misrepresenting facts. Senior devotees should recognize and restrain all such instances of fanaticism. They should teach immature devotees that a preacher can be protected from succumbing to such baseness only if, while presenting the topmost truth to others, he is internally peaceful by considering himself an unworthy instrument and the servant of those to whom he ministers. Despite all these considerations, Srila Prabhupada's mandate to kick the rascals in the face with boots remains. Many devotees today would be appalled if any of their contemporaries were to consider these celebrated words of Srila Prabhupada anything but an idiosyncrasy to be recited occasionally as a nostalgic remembrance. To take them seriously would risk being branded the egoistic antithesis of a sadhu. Yet there is no doubt that in pronouncing these words, Srila Prabhupada meant his disciples to earnestly accept his diktat, to preach robustly and to metaphorically, not literally, kick the rascals. See the end note related by Giriraj Swami, page 167. Okay, we'll come back. Srila Prabhupada and all previous acharyas rightly exhorted the rascals to give up their rascaldom, accept Krishna, and become happy. So to label as fanatics those devotees who similarly speak contentiously implies that Srila Prabhupada and the Acharyas also were fanatics. Factually, the Vaishnava Acharyas, by decisively repeating the message of Shastra, though it be annoying to rascals, demonstrate total freedom from egoism. Even if seemingly intolerably scathing in their preaching, their sole motive is compassionate desire for uplifting others. They do not consider personal loss or gain, or popular acceptance or rejection. They simply want to please Krishna. They are the most broad minded personalities, for they wish to see everyone engaged in the service of Krishna. Such is the exalted example to follow, which stands far above the fanaticism of one class of neophytes and the misplaced tolerance of another. Misplaced tolerance means the socially acceptable version, that is, acquiescence toward that tradi- much behavior that traditional societies have always deemed unacceptable. But in Vaishnav parlance, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's cardinal ordinance to be more forbearing than a tree refers to acceptance of the various difficulties that a devotee must undergo while serving Mahaprabhu's mission within this world. Chapter 12. Learning how to preach strongly. Preaching is specially meant for Madhyam Adhikaris, not for neophytes. Quote, neophyte devotee does not know how to preach. In the lower stage of devotional service, he cannot become preacher. When he is in a little upper, second stage, he can become preacher. Madhyam Adhikari means preacher. Unless one comes to the Madhyam Adhikar, he cannot preach. First of all, you become really preacher, then go to preach. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu never sent neophytes to preach. For neophytes, preaching is not their business. Neophytes should stick to the worship of the deity in the temple. And those who have understood the philosophy, applied the philosophy in his life, he should go for preaching. Otherwise, he will preach wrongly. End quote. However, we should, again, it's a quote, we should not remain as neophyte devotees, end quote. Those who are active in the Krishna consciousness movement should not remain in the neophyte stage, but should rise to the platform of preachers, the second platform of devotional service. Still, it does not require advanced devotion or learning to understand and to tell others the simple, undeniable truths that this world is miserable, that birth, death, old age, and disease, pace change, Prabhuji, and disease are miserable, and that human life is superficial without the quest for a solution to these problems. These truths form the basis of devotional commitment and distinguishes the path of Krishna consciousness from any number of secular or religious dogmas. As such, these truths are powerful weapons with which even an at least somewhat capable neophyte can begin to impress upon others the urgent need for Krishna consciousness. Indeed, it is expected and desirable that those who have newly discovered the treasure of Krishna consciousness be bursting with zeal to share it with others. Such enthusiasm should be encouraged, not discouraged, even if it sometimes goes overboard. Quote, neophytes may sometimes commit some offense. There is nothing surprising in this, but their ardent desire to convey the idea of Krishna consciousness is always laudable. End quote. Still, the enthusiasm of neophytes must be refined and purified of tendencies toward fanaticism, lest they continue to unnecessarily offend. Fanaticism, manifested as lack of proper understanding, discrimination, and compassion, springs from the neophyte's dearth of lack of knowledge. Obviously, to most effectively convey Srila Prabhupada's teachings to the world, one must understand them well and in depth. One must know the science of Krishna, then he can preach to others. Therefore, the natural antidote to fanaticism is spiritual education. Newcomers should be trained to become effective members of the preaching mission of Srila Prabhupada, who desired many preachers who are soundly versed in the scriptures to convince the world to take to Krishna consciousness. Apart from their being trained in scriptural knowledge, it is essential that prospective preachers also be made fully aware the purpose of preaching is to benefit others by bringing them to Krishna consciousness and helping them understand that their present outlook and activities are not at all beneficial for them. Preaching is not meant for dominating or exploiting others, for gaining wealth, fame, or popularity, or to amass numbers of followers to boost one's own prestige. Given that Srila Prabhupada's mission is meant for preaching, its leaders should be expected to act on the platform of Madhyam Adhikar and to prepare beginners, Kanishta Adhikaris, to come to that platform. Everyone starts raw and commits mistakes, but through experience and by the careful guidance of concerned seniors, newcomers can learn how to speak clearly, incisively, and effectively, while also remaining realistically humble, not imitatively posing themselves as more advanced than they are. Quote, our devotees of the society should not remain in the neophyte position, neither should they try to imitate the topmost devotee. End quote. Just as a fighter must be trained in wielding weapons, astra, a devotee should be trained in the art of presenting shastra. Regular participation in devotional programs, including hearing of classes conducted in the spirit of Srila Prabhupada, should help newcomers to absorb the teachings that they are expected to live and to propagate. Also helpful for trainee preachers are question and answer sessions and mock debates aimed at preparing devotees for the actual challenges that they are likely to meet. Gradually, newcomers can be introduced to the practical preaching field, or in some cases, depending on the newcomer's attitude and maturity and the level of competence of those guiding them, recruits can, almost from their first day in devotional service, be inducted into preaching. And factually, often newcomers automatically preach from the moment they decide to take up Krishna consciousness, being peppered with questions and maybe also objections from their relatives and acquaintances. They have no choice but to reply as best as they can. And sometimes the unconsidered words of a beginner can be transformatory, as happened with Arnold Das, a sociology professor from Lithuania, who was a self confessed atheist and hedonist. A friend of his who had just begun devotional service warned him that he could end up taking his next birth as a monkey. Those words inspired in Arnoldas a fear and introspectiveness that some years later culminated in his taking to Krishna consciousness in full seriousness. Srila Prabhupada gave a formula that should be the motto of all preachers, by imbibing which even beginners can start to preach effectively. Quote, the real purpose of this movement to teach people how he can surrender to Krishna. That is all. That is the sum and substance of this movement. If one accepts this principle without any difficulty, he is immediately a preacher. End quote. However, preferably for at least the first few months, an apprentice preacher should accompany senior devotees, observe them in action, and start his preaching career in their presence. For instance, by assisting in manning a book table. Indeed, several years of book distribution provides a solid basis for a devotee to excel in preaching and indeed all areas of devotional service. Self study is also essential. Srila Prabhupada particularly emphasized the importance of studying his books, and it is the duty of all who claim to be his followers, especially those who represent him as preachers, to become deeply acquainted with the teachings that he so painstakingly imparted therein. This requires regular, thorough, and prayerful perusal of those books. If you quote, if you read, then you will be able to defend yourself from the opposing parties. That will help you in preaching because in preaching you have to answer so many questions. You have to meet so many opposing elements. So if you are strong in your position by reading books, Vedic literature, then you become very, very favorite to Krishna. Because you are on the field work, you have to meet so many opposite elements and you have to satisfy them or fight with them with conclusive statements from Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. And as such, it is needed that you should be thoroughly conversant with the truth. End quote. Reading biographical works about Srila Prabhupada and listening to recordings of his lectures and conversations is also very helpful for imbibing the sense of how Srila Prabhupada personally preached among various types of people, including committed devotees, the curious, the apathetic, and the vociferously inimical. However, devotees should exercise discrimination, as not everything is meant for everyone. For instance, certain statements made by Srila Prabhupada to individuals in letters or spoken to a few devotees in private settings were not intended to be widely broadcast. Until devotees become steeped in the transcendental knowledge delineated in Srila Prabhupada's books and thus raised to the Madhyama platform, their criticism of non-devotees, even if accurate, is likely to be tinged by dogmatism and sectarianism, and they are liable to appear foolish in proportion to the degree of their assertiveness. Therefore, quote, all devotees, especially preachers, must know the philosophy of Krishna consciousness so as not to be embarrassed and insulted when they preach. Unless our men understand thoroughly the philosophy, how will they be able to preach? Attaining the competence required to preach need not be very difficult. Quote, everyone can become a first class speaker. Simply cram the purports of my books. The references are there, the philosophy is there, everything is there. So if you do it, everyone will be pleased with your speaking. If you chant and read, you will also be powerful to preach, and whoever will hear will be converted. Simply read my books and repeat what I have written. Then your preaching will be perfect. End quote. When a devotee asked how he could face South Indian Panditas possessing extensive knowledge of Shastra, Srila Prabhupada replied that if he could just memorize 30 key verses of Bhagavad Gita, he would be able to defeat Mayavadi arguments. Srila Prabhupada similarly, okay, footnote, although Srila Prabhupada did not specify what those key verses were, those that he most often cited may be understood as being the most important for his followers to quote when preaching. Srila Prabhupada similarly instructed another disciple, quote, so far the impersonalist rascal, you may simply challenge him by asking, what is your philosophy? It is not very difficult to defeat these persons because they haven't got any substance, simply big words. But we have our books, Bhagavad Gita. If you engage him in public debate, politely handle his statements with a cool head, and reply from the authority of our books, that's all. Krishna will give you all help to expose his lack of knowledge and his faulty understanding. End quote. Of course, it is also essential to study Srila Prabhupada's books in their entirety to gain deep understanding of the teachings therein. Neophytes who are unwilling to imbibe the philosophy of Krishna consciousness in all its depth and subtlety should be restrained from attempting to present it forcefully. Those who attempt to speak strongly but lack the requisite knowledge, spiritual strength, and expertise are more likely to mangle the message of the Absolute Truth than to effectively communicate it. Such preaching is at best an embarrassment and is liable to resemble the bigotry of fanatical religionists who are a blight on true theism. Furthermore, controversial subjects about which a devotee is likely to be challenged, for instance, the subordinate social role of women in Vedic culture, are better broached by devotees who have sufficiently studied and understood, according to Guru, Sadhu, Shastra, the various issues involved. As Srila Prabhupada once warned a group of disciples, there is a great art to criticizing. Unfortunately, you do not know that art. End quote. To be most effective, preaching requires not only knowledge but also developed insight. While always stressing that the message should not be changed, Srila Prabhupada expected devotees to come to the level of being able to convey that message in their own idiom. Quote, you simply have to study carefully our books and then, in your own words, try to express what you have read. This will automatically make you a very successful preacher. Study my books and reproduce the purports in your own language. You should instruct your temple residents to preach like this. This is preaching. We haven't got to invent something by our fertile brain for preaching. Everything is there. One who is expert for presenting these things before the audience so they can conveniently understand, that is successful preacher. So sorry, you have only to speak what Krishna has said, then you become a preacher.
I will take a pause here, Prabhuji. Do you want to
Yeah.
continue or
How many pages are left in this chapter?
two, 3 pages are left? Almost 3 pages.
Okay. You tell me, Prabhuji, it's up to you.
No, if let me ask devotees here.
Yeah.
Anybody else wants
Yeah.
to read? Okay, Jagannath. Yeah, let's go, Prabhuji. Continue.
Okay. A devotee should. This is the right page, Prabhuji?
Yeah, should be right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the right page.
Yes, yes, yes. A devotee should speak yatha mati yatha shrutam, according to realization based on what he has heard. Quote, a speaker must have full confidence in the previous acharya, and at the same time, he must realize the subject matter so nicely that he can present the matter for the particular circumstances in a suitable manner. The original purpose of the text must be maintained. No obscure meaning should be screwed out of it. Yet, it should be presented in an interesting manner for the understanding of the audience. This is called realization. Such realization arises from serious hearing. Because I was quote, because I was serious for hearing, therefore now I am serious about kirtan, means speaking or preaching. One who is serious about hearing, he can become a future nice preacher. Shravanam Kirtanam. Next stage is developed. If one has actually heard nicely, then he will speak nicely. Shravanam Kirtanam Smaranam. Then consciousness will automatically develop because when you speak or you hear, unless your mind is concentrated, your consciousness is right. You cannot rightly hear or speak. End quote. Notwithstanding various caveats for restraining neophyte devotees who themselves are not very sure about what they are meant to be preaching, there is really no substitute for taking the plunge. Sincerity is the key, and association with proficient preachers in the class is the classroom. But ultimately, a devotee who desires to speak strongly in service to Srila Prabhupada has to get out and do it. Attempting to present the Krishna conscious message as it is to non devotees constitutes a crash course in gaining insightful knowledge. A devotee out in the fray is liable to be challenged at every moment without forewarning on any one of the galaxy of possible objections. By definition, a neophyte's face is pliable and uncertain, and his knowledge of devotional lore meager.
Prabhu, we can let Asit Prabhu
Yes,
read here. Yeah,
yes,
thank you.
Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Thank you,
Hare
Srila Prabhu.
Krishna.
Asit Prabhu, get ready. I will transfer the control to you. Yeah, Asit Prabhu,
Prabhu. So I'll start.
page number 100. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yet even a neophyte can sense the inherent error in the words of non-devotees, even if he is unable to rebut them. Preaching gives impetus to the neophyte to deepen his knowledge and hone his skills, and to pray to Krishna for the ability to comprehend and effectively present Shastric teachings. In short, a neophyte's beginning attempts to preach are the very means by which he can quickly become convinced and thus rise to the level of a competent preacher, a Madhyam Adhikari. Preaching, preaching, you will become a perfect preacher. Thus, preaching is itself a powerful form of sadhana. Quote, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has commented that a devotee, when he goes to preach and is attacked by the opposing elements, that is also culture of bhakti, devotional service. Not that when you go to preach, you think, I am wasting my time, better to sit down in a place and chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Krishna. This is all nonsense. You have to preach. and face the opposing elements. That is better than chanting Hare Krishna. End quote. As with any sadhana, time and practice are required with regard to speaking the truth in a manner so that it will be accepted. Srila Prabhupada wrote, to perfect this art takes practice. So practice preaching from this understanding, and gradually you will develop it more and more. End quote. For those who engage in the preaching of these two Vedic literatures, Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, it is very easy to get out of the illusory conditioned life imposed upon us by Maya. Preaching is the very means of purification, and thus, neophyte devotees, unless they are extraordinarily disqualified, example, highly socially incompetent or mentally disordered, should by all means be encouraged to qualify as a preacher. If even an inexperienced devotee has at least a basic grasp of Shastric lore, then by sincerely repeating Krishna's teachings, he not only benefits others but also preaches to himself. By railing against all that is wrong in the world and in other people, he must, unless he is a hypocrite, likewise confront the wrong within himself. Knowing himself to be susceptible to the influence of Maya, he nonetheless seriously endeavors to surrender to Krishna and to forsake Maya forever, and exhorts others to do so. Thus, his conviction increases and undesirable traits within him diminish. Gradually, or even quickly, by his absorption in the preaching struggle, the aspiring devotee imbibes a deep desire to benefit others. As he continues to speak the unadulterated truth, notwithstanding the inevitable difficulties in so doing, Krishna increasingly bestows upon him the necessary intelligence, purity, and skill for preaching effectively, and thus he becomes surcharged with spiritual energy. Over and above all other considerations, the most important factor in becoming an effective preacher is to always consider oneself an insignificant servant and to constantly pray for the blessings of Srila Prabhupada, all the Acharyas, and Lord Krishna, that one may become an instrument in fulfilling their desires for injecting pure love of Godhead into the heart of every jiva in existence. Then Krishna will bestow ability to preach, as was revealed in Srila Prabhupada's response when once being praised by Harikesh Das for his expertise in communicating the Krishna conscious philosophy to non devotees. I say all these things because I always think of this. You always think how to talk with these demoniac people. Then Krishna will give you intelligence. Chapter 13 Scientific, not dogmatic. Our propaganda should be by reasoning, by philosophy, by science, by argument. How to convince him that he is in the illusory stage. End quote. The approach shall be and must be authoritative, scientific, and universal. You should present Krishna consciousness not as a religion, but a science of God realization. Try to convince them that it is not just a kind of faith, it is a chance to understand God. In every religion, there is a glimpse of the idea of God. This movement is explaining what God is. The educated persons should be convinced about this fact. Every sane man should be interested to know God and then love Him. You have to introduce the matter of God scientifically, and that will be appreciated by any reasonable man. Prominent symptoms of the confusion and arrogance of the modern age are that few people accept Shastra as incontrovertible, and that calls to scriptural authority are largely deemed sectarian and dogmatic. Indeed, even many persons who are somewhat sympathetic to Krishna consciousness tend to consider it just one opinion among many. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada often stressed the scientific non dogmatic nature of his presentation. The Krishna consciousness movement is trying to teach this science of the soul not in any dogmatic way, but through complete scientific and philosophical understanding. We are presenting religion on the basis of philosophy and logic. We are not blindly following. We are not dogmatic. We have got reason, philosophy, and science, everything. If you want to understand this Krishna consciousness on the basis of philosophy, logic, and science, we are prepared to present it. We are prepared to present to you. Religion is generally considered to be an unverifiable belief system regarded by detractors and also by many proponents as being inherently indefinable and vague. But vagueness naturally tends toward effectiveness, which simply nourishes the disgust that materially intelligent skeptics feel toward religion as being, in their view, irrelevant fluff, a psychological crutch, or a deliberately misleading scourge upon mankind. The present deluge of atheism is an inevitable response to religion as propagated in the world today. And only devotees who have been trained in Bhagavad Siddhanta can offer an appropriate and sensible understanding of God that can deliver the world from both outrageous theism and outraged atheism. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada wanted to establish Krishna consciousness as being scientific, inasmuch as every person is capable of experiencing its reality if he but applies himself to the process, and also because the basic principles of Krishna consciousness, as stated in Shastra, are not mere doctrinal pronouncements but are facts that can be established by intelligent analysis and thus should be accepted by anyone who is actually scientific in the true sense of the term. Whenever asked what he believed, Srila Prabhupada would correct the questioner. Mike Robinson, can you tell me what you believe? What the philosophy of the Hare Krishna movement is? Srila Prabhupada, yes. Krishna consciousness is not a question of belief. It is a science. The first step is to know the difference between a living body and a dead body. Mike Robinson. So we are free to choose what we believe to be important. Religion is important because if we believe in God and lead a good life, Srila Prabhupada, it is not a question of belief. Do not bring in this question of belief. It is law. For instance, there is a government. You may believe or not believe, but if you break the law, you will be punished by the government. Similarly, whether you believe or don't believe, there is a God. If you don't believe in God and you independently do whatever you like, then you will be punished by the laws of nature. Mike Robinson, I see. Does it matter what religion you believe? Would it matter if one was a devotee of Krishna? Srila Prabhupada. It's not a question of religion. It is a question of science. You are a spiritual being, but because you are materially conditioned, you are under the laws of material nature. So you may believe in the Christian religion, and I may believe in the Hindu religion, but that does not mean that you are going to become an old man and I am not. We are talking of the science of growing old. This is natural law. It is not that because you are Christian, you are becoming old, or because I am Hindu, I am not becoming old. Everyone is becoming old. So, similarly, all the laws of nature are applicable to everyone. Whether you believe this religion or that religion, it does not matter. A major challenge for devotees in the modern world is to present the message of Shastra, as Srila Prabhupada did, in a format meant to appeal to persons without faith in Shastra, who believe in analysis and reasoning. Those who are preachers in ISKCON will certainly meet many people who believe in intellectual arguments. Most of these people do not believe in the authority of the Vedas. Nevertheless, they accept intellectual speculation and argument. Therefore, the preachers of Krishna consciousness should be prepared to defeat others by argument, just as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did. Generally, when Srila Prabhupada spoke to people who lacked faith in Vedic pronouncements, which broadly means persons who were neither Hindus nor his disciples, he would argue certain basic principles. Knowing that Krishna consciousness is largely unintelligible to persons whose brains are muddled by modern education, Srila Prabhupada nevertheless set about the task of making it intelligible to them. Repeatedly and untiringly, he presented reasons for acknowledging that the living force is distinct from the body and that no one can honestly deny being controlled by higher powers. To listeners who were sufficiently intelligent and sincere to accept such existential facts and thereby also to accept him as superior in knowledge, Srila Prabhupada would provide specific information from Shastra on those topics and would also explain the relevance of those truths in people's lives. Following Srila Prabhupada's example, preachers of Krishna consciousness seek to disabuse materialistic persons of the multiple misconceptions they are attached to. Not an easy task, for the Vaishnava understanding directly contradicts all dogmas cherished by materialists. For instance, almost everyone who prides himself on a scientific outlook is unknowingly attached to materialistic credos, beginning with implicit faith in the supposedly scientific method and in certain unprovable theorems, such as biological evolution of species. Another widespread error, popular among both materialistic and pseudo spiritual egalitarians, is the notion that everyone is entitled to his own opinion. Concomitant with this is widespread revulsion against proselytizing and strong persuasion on the grounds that it is arrogant to consider one's own doctrine superior, for, for all opinions are equally valid. Critics uphold that people should be allowed to do as they like without being bothered by any preaching or proselytizing, based on the myth that everyone is sufficiently intelligent and unbiased to decide what is best for him, and therefore they may impartially be given information and ideas and then themselves decide how to accept it. Of course, such detractors of proselyte, proselytization contradict themselves by proselytizing against proselytizing.
Prabhu, you can stop here. Anybody else wants to read Prabhuji's? I can pick it up. Yeah. The taboo against proselytizing is further hypocritical because the educational system, the mass media, and indeed the whole materialistic culture all indoctrinate people from the very birth to fully identify themselves as the body and to unquestionably believe that life comes from chemicals and that the goal of life is to acquire money for indulgence in sense gratification. When charged with proselytizing, devotees should respond that to urge people to admit that they are facing a dire reality and to thus exhort them to consider a wholly different approach to life should not be deemed antisocial, especially when both ribald materialism and standard religious process have failed to create happiness and peace within human society. Footnote. In this regard, the analogy of the kite flyer is also relevant. End footnote. The task of devotee preachers is to demonstrate how Krishna consciousness is factually superior to the tangle of false concepts that people of stultified intelligence accept as the template of reality. Vaishnavas must scientifically establish Krishna consciousness as being categorically distinct from both ordinary religious faith, which is changeable, and all anthropocentric efforts. There's a footnote for which is changeable. Srila Prabhupada succinctly and lucidly establishes this in his introduction to Bhagavad Gita as it is. Continuing. To understand the nature of actuality, unless devotees present Krishna consciousness as Sanatan Dharma, the eternal intrinsic characteristic of every living being, people cannot but consider it merely another dogma. This misunderstanding was refuted by Srila Prabhupada. Professor Hopkins, some people see your writing as dogmatic. Srila Prabhupada, no. You found out any passage in my books that is dogmatic, then you say that it is dogmatic. Any page you open, where is it dogmatic? Professor Hopkins. Well, dogmatic, to call someone else dogmatic means to start with that you don't agree with that with what they are saying. If I agree with you and you, Srila Prabhupada, no, you have to agree. You open any passage of my book, Professor Hopkins. Well, some people would say to insist that Krishna is the only way, that Krishna consciousness is the only way. Srila Prabhupada. No, no. The only thing is that God is one, that you have to accept God. God, sorry. No, no. The only thing is that God is one, that you have to accept. God cannot be many. If God has got competitor, then he is not God. Professor Hopkins, okay. Srila Prabhupada. So, if you don't admit Krishna is the only God, then you present who is the only God. You tell me. Either you have to learn from me or I have to learn from you. If you do not know what is God, you cannot say Krishna is not God. As soon as you say Krishna is not God, that means you must know what is God. You present. But if you cannot present, you say, no, I do not know. No, I do not know God. Then you cannot say Krishna is not God. Professor Hopkins, all right. Srila Prabhupada. So they are dogmatic. Dogmatically, they are saying Krishna is not God. He does not know God, and he says Krishna is not God. So, what is this nonsense? You do not know God. How can you say Krishna is not God? In this confrontational dialectic style, Srila Prabhupada revealed all doctrines other than the pure Vaishnava Siddhanta as dogmatic, humdrum, ignorant, and unscientific. Devotees must, devotees must submissively hear from Srila Prabhupada to become convinced that non devotees are awash in an ocean of unfounded beliefs, having been cheated by deluded intellectuals, scientists, and religionists, all of which theories are based on disastrously misconceived propositions fortified by the pure knowledge of Krishna consciousness, particularly as given by Srila Prabhupada, in reference to the modern context, devotees can, as did Srila Prabhupada, boldly, clearly, provocatively challenge the Sikh status quo. All types of demoniac misleaders, religious, political, intellectual, and the rest, should come to fear the Krishna consciousness movement as a determined enemy sworn to counter at every step their chronic espousing of deceitful speculations. Chapter 14. The decline of strong speaking in ISKCON. That which some perceive as fanaticism within our movement originated from Srila Prabhupada himself. Srila Prabhupada was confrontational and he inculcated an aggressive mood in his disciples. He often spoke of defeating others and particularly liked to meet famous men, to corner them and defeat them. He regularly railed at the karmis, whose nonsense he never tired of scorning. The black and white distinction he made between karmis and devotees helped to keep his disciples alert to the dangers of Maya. Godhead is light, nations is darkness. Where there is Godhead, there is no nations. Painting Krishna consciousness as a white, which it is, and Maya as black, which it is, created an atmosphere in ISKCON that was conducive for accepting everything favorable and rejecting everything unfavorable for advancing in Krishna consciousness. The original outlook in ISKCON was Krishna consciousness is all there is, everything else is madness. We have to surrender to Krishna and go out preaching to save the Mudas. In the years subsequent to Srila Prabhupada's departure from this world, several devotees, observing that our movement's members are generally young, passionate, and immature, decided that we should be more mature and balanced. Disturbed by public disapproval resulting from excess of neophyte proselytizing, zeal. Such reformers sought to diffuse the combative mood and the holier than thou mentality. They considered that the bandying of words like karmis, mudas, demons, and animals by their compatriots, who themselves were prone to fall back into the very activities they so fiercely vociferated against, was simply the sloganeering of fanatics. These less militant devotees opined that if ISKCON members are boorish and dismissive of those from they are supposed to be communicating with, if we so vehemently reject the karmis, then karmis will reciprocally then karmis will reciprocally reject us as a cult of moronic, blinkered zombies. Therefore, an endeavor was made to instill a more mature, empathetic ethos in ISKCON and to present Krishna consciousness in a manner deemed respectable by the Mudas. Arguably, in non traditional climes, it makes sense to repackage our message according to the prevailing social milieu and via secular topical issues. Srila Prabhupada himself did so in Easy Journey to Other Planets by using scientific themes and terms for presenting the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. Srila Prabhupada described the rationale behind the technique. Quote, the world is most solely in need of education in Krishna consciousness. But due to the ignorance of the age, they are not interested in knowledge of the self. So, if by labeling the bottle in some way more to attract them, we are still able to teach Krishna consciousness, let us do it. End quote. Thus, it is acceptable to change the packaging but not the content. Nonetheless, adjustment or understatement of the philosophical content seems to be widespread in ISKCON today. And devotees who aspire to follow Srila Prabhupada in the unequivocal manner that he taught are often labeled fanatics or dinosaurs for attempting to do so. Devotees aspire for sophistication and social integration, and all out attacks on material life have become unfashionable. Controversial topics are tactfully sidestepped or explained largely in terms of contemporary psychology or political theory rather than via Srila Prabhupada's teachings. Many verses that Srila Prabhupada regularly quoted are rarely heard. Srila Prabhupada's style of lecturing, didactic, intense, and aimed at educating and convincing the hearers, is now uncommon. Classes by devotees are often hardly what might be expected in a mission meant for ushering in a spiritual revolution or saving the world. Too many discourses consist mostly of stories and jokes, seemingly meant to make the audience feel good rather than offer them vital instruction, more to entertain them to convey the grave message of the parampara. Lectures that previously would have been considered normal are now frowned on as fundamentalist and overbearing. Our movement has become reoriented, publicly acceptable, and staid. No longer a threat to the sinful culture as it was perceived in the last 70s. Quote, they are not feeling the weight of this movement. Formerly, they thought, these people come and go, but now they see we are staying. Now we have set fire. It will go on. It cannot be stopped. You can bring big fire brigades, but the fire will act. The brainwash books are already there. Even if they stop externally, internally it will go on. Our first class campaign is book distribution. Go house to house. The real fighting is now. Krishna will give you all protection. So chant Hare Krishna and fight. By propaganda, you cannot suppress the truth. You cannot suppress fire by propaganda. Now we have to become strong to defend. The fighting has become acute, but if you stick to the regulative principles, Krishna will give all strength. Whatever is done is by Krishna's mercy. They are afraid that a different culture is conquering over their culture. Men of the Kamsa's class are very much afraid and are busy trying to stop this movement, especially in the Western countries. One politician has remarked that the Krishna consciousness movement is spreading like an epidemic and that if not checked immediately, within 10 years, it may capture governmental power. End quote. We can read Prabhu's if you all are okay. Have we thrown out the baby with the bathwater? Nowadays, within ISKCON, we hear much about the dangers of speaking strongly, yet rarely hear about the dangers of not speaking strongly. By over adjusting our former tirade against materialism, we have again become influenced by the superficially broad minded humanistic ethos that we previously rejected, wherein assertiveness and certainty are seen as false and everyone is entitled to his own view, according to the understanding that there is no fixed reality. Footnote. This understanding is actually demoniac. See Bhagavad Gita 16.8. End of footnote. No absolute black or white, just innumerable poorly defined shades of grey. By our becoming a part of society instead of remaining a brave alternative to it, public appreciation of Krishna consciousness has not dramatically increased. In the Western world, the former antipathy toward devotee has been subsided, yet the Hare Krishna movement has largely merged into insignificance. Although many elements have contributed to this Hare Krishna implosion, clearly a major difference between the ISKCON of then and the ISKCON of today is that the daring spirit of challenging the materialistic civilization is now largely absent. Another major cause of our conversion from lions to rabbits has been fear of distributing donors has been fear of disturbing donors. If people are willing to contribute, why risk upsetting them by telling them what Srila Prabhupada told us? Let the dollars be their devotional service. Thinking thus, we prefer to cheat people by keeping them in ignorance. But when we prioritize money over clear preaching, we become prostitutes. The less we speak our distinct message, the more we lose our distinct identity. The less that there is a straightforward scientific delineation of the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, the more our movement moves towards the sentimental type of bhakti presented by innumerable deviant Hindu groups and gurus with all their attendant cheapness. Considering that our departure from Srila Prabhupada is already so obvious that several academic scholars have written entire books about it. Footnote. See Hare Krishna Transformed. E. Burke Rochford Jr., New York University Press 2007, Chapter 6. See also The Hare Krishna Movement, 40 Years of Chant and Change. Graham Dwyer and Richard Cole, IB Taurus and Company, 2007. End footnote. We are a society must decide how serious our commitment is to following Srila Prabhupada in words and deed, and whether our practice of not speaking strongly, as did Srila Prabhupada, is actually the best way to serve him. With this, we come to the end of today's reading. We'll